My new neighbor always seems to have blood on his clothes. Mr. Johnson always greeted me with a smile in the morning. He'd flaunt those pearly whites shamelessly, just barely noticeable under that crazy mustache. You know, the one where it sort of looks like a crow has died trying to consume your nose. And he'd wave energetically as I walked down to my mailbox. I'd raise my hand idly and do the old, "Good morning, neighbor" routine, but I'd quickly retreat to avoid getting trapped in conversation. He was nice enough, but he was one of those extremely neat and extremely boring kind of people. If he caught you off guard, you'd be talking about the weather for hours. Mr. Johnson moved in next door a little bit over a month ago. The place had been empty for a year or so, ever since the old man Gordon kicked the bucket. He didn't have many relatives, and it took them a while to figure out who'd be taking over the property. After 6 months, the deed was signed over to his nephew, who in turn tried to flip the place post-haste. But because of the nature of his uncle's death, he was found rotting in his basement a month after he died. There wasn't much interest, until Mr. Johnson came around. He didn't seem to mind the history of the place at all. In fact, he'd brag about it constantly, as if the rot stain on the concrete floor was some sort of trophy. It didn't bother me at first. I like a good cadaver story just as much as the next guy. But when you factored in the mustache and that holier-than-thou smirk, it became increasingly tiresome. And then I started noticing that he always seemed to have blood on his clothes. I don't know when it started, but I know that after I first noticed it, I couldn't not see it anymore. It was just so obvious, yet so indistinguishable. Every day, clean clothes, fresh bloodstain. On his sleeve, on the leg of his pants, on the collar of his shirt, on the tip of his boots. Just a little drop, a vague smudge of red, a little hint of the old crimson. And his smile was fading, just a tad bleaker every morning. A little broodier, a little darker, until it was gone. I'd ask him about the blood sometimes. Just, out of curiosity. You can't help it when you keep seeing it daily. You need answers. It's human nature. "So," I'd say, "what's with the blood?" "It's just paint," he'd say, avoiding eye contact at all costs. "I've been redoing the basement." And so it went. Every other day, I'd ask again, and he would reply with some incompetent excuse that wouldn't hold up in court. I believed him for a bit, I'll admit it. He did seem like the type that would redo things, just to have something to blab on about with his golf buddies. But after the second week of painting, my skepticism was skyrocketing. And with the accelerated decline of his smile, I knew something dubious was going on. So one day, I decided enough was enough, and just confronted him right there on the street. "So," I said, "wanna show me your basement?" He stared at me for quite some time, his mustache dancing like a drunk caterpillar, his eyebrows raising and lowering like pinball flippers. I could see a drop of sweat forming on his forehead, slowly making its way down to the root of his nose. His eyes darted back and forth like they were following a phantom laser pointer. "Sure," he eventually responded, "but, I'm not done redoing it yet. It's a bit messy." I just shrugged. "I don't mind," I said. "I just want to see how it's coming along." He nodded nervously and awkwardly ushered me up his driveway. I paced up to his door and turned to face him. He seemed flustered, no doubt about it. He definitely had something to hide. "In we go then," he said weirdly as he opened the door. I followed him and looked around briefly as we walked towards the stairs leading to the basement. He'd really managed to fix the place up. Everything was sparkling new and shiny. "Very nice," I noted. "You've been hard at work, I see." He nodded and gave me a half-hearted smile. "Yes, but the basement is proving to be quite a handful." I followed him down the stairs into the basement. At first glance, everything seemed perfect. Shiny hardwood floors covered the old concrete. The walls were painted in a tasteful crimson color. And he'd even replaced the old window with a stylishly profiled one. I raised my eyebrow inquisitively. "This is spotless," I said. "I thought you said it was messy." He banged his head in what I assumed to be shame. "Yes, but there's this one thing." He pointed to the corner of the room. "Behind the sofa." He walked over to the sofa and motioned for me to take a look. I followed close behind and peered over his shoulder. "Ah, yes," I said knowingly. "I see what you mean." "It keeps coming back," he complained. "I don't know what to do. It must be rust or something." "I have an idea," I said, staring into the back of his neck. "Forget all about it." He turned to face me, his expression quite bewildered. I jabbed my knife into his jugular with some precision, and enjoyed the brief show of blood before he sank down to the ground. A lovely pool of crimson, steadily growing around him. It didn't take long before his heart gave up, and he just lay there, motionless. His ridiculous mustache, now slightly more tolerable, tinted red. "Is that still paint on your clothes?" I said mockingly. I hung his dead body down from the ceiling with a rope I found in his garage. The last remaining pints of blood dripped into the bucket below, the soothing clanks and glops like chicken soup for the soul. I studied the stain hidden behind his sofa. It would appear I had a leak. The brown-red mush gathering in a stinking pool looking all too familiar. I suspected one of the pipes of my acid tanks needed some fixing. It must have seeped into the foundations, eventually ending up here. Such a shame, really. It completely ruined the new hardwood floors. When the night falls, I'll drag his body home and drop it into one of the tanks. It will take 2 days for the bones to dissolve. That should be enough time to fix the leak and clean up this mess. I seriously hope the next owner doesn't have a mustache. This is Kinetic Symphony. If you've enjoyed this narrated story, please subscribe and like the video to help me grow. Thank you.